Amy, do you think that this is the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation government simulation? We are proposing a federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine, from the river to the sea, for the entire people of Israel and Palestine, 14 million people. That includes Gaza, the West Bank, Israel, and Jerusalem. We are proposing a federal government that will exist and will become a reality, regardless of whether the Israeli or the Palestinian government authorize it or not, or regardless of whether the Israeli or the Palestinian governments exist at all. We believe that a federal government based on a constitution, democracy, and fairness, and a common parliament and common executive and judicial and legislative power in the government, based on democracy, based on secular principles, separation between church and state, will exist and will have the power to remain into the future, regardless of whether the Israeli or the Palestinian governments will exist in the future. We're not calling for the dismantlement of the Israeli or the Palestinian government. We are saying that while those governments exist, we will work with them, the federal government will work with them, and in fact give them veto on issues that violates their sovereignty. But the federal government that we are proposing will be in competition with the Israeli and the Palestinian governments in order to create peace. The competition is peace. You can read our Constitution at ipconfederation.org. The Constitution is available in 3 languages, Arabic, English, and Hebrew, and it explains the structure of the federal government that will have 3 branches: legislative branch with 300 parliament members, Palestinians and Israelis together, and an executive branch with a president and vice president, 1 Palestinian, 1 Israeli, rotating in 2 years, and a judicial branch with equal number of Israeli and Palestinian judges in the judicial branch. My name is Joseph Avasar. You could reach me at josephavassar@gmail.com. Our guest today is Professor David Beito. David T. Beito is an emeritus professor of history at the University of Alabama and a senior fellow at the Independent Institute. He holds a PhD from the University of Wisconsin. His academic research covers a wide range of topics in American history, including civil rights, tax revolts, civil liberties, the non-governmental provision of infrastructure, and mutual aid. His books include From Mutual Aid to the Welfare State, Fraternal Societies and Social Services, 1980 to 1967, and TRM, Howard, Doctor, Entrepreneur, Civil Rights Pioneer, co-author with Linda Royster Beito. His 2 most recent books are The New Deal's War on the Bill of Rights, The Untold Story of FDR's Concentration Camps, Censorship, and Mass Surveillance, published by Oakland Independent Institute in 2023, and edited collection with Marcus Witcher, Rose Lane Says, Thoughts of Liberty and Equality, 1942 to 1945, published by Pierre South Dakota Historical Society in 2024. He recently wrote an article, A Way Out of the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, a Swiss-style canton system, which he wanted to discuss as part of the simulation. And we will discuss his proposal for Swiss-style canton system in Israel-Palestine as part of the legislation for the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation Parliament to vote on.
Okay.
Our New York Times ad hopefully is appearing today in the New York Times, inviting people to participate and to know about our federal government proposal. On January 28th, we hopefully will have another ad in the Washington Post. The guest on January 5th will be Omar Shaban, who is a Palestinian analyst on political economy of the Middle East and a candidate. He was a candidate in the first Palestinian parliamentary election of 1996. On January 19, we will have Walid Shumali. He is the co-founder and the director of the Palestinian Center for Research and Cultural Dialogue, PCRD. On February 2nd, we will have Ray Hanania. He is an award-winner Palestinian-American journalist who covered national and international politics. And on February 16, we will have Professor Shaul Magid, who is a professor of Jewish and Religious Studies at Dartmouth College, and I believe he also teaches at Harvard. And Nasir, our regular participant, suggested him, and I think it's a great suggestion. We are asking you to sorry, I received a phone call. I have on Instagram, we are showing the simulation, so I apologize. We are demonstrating how a federal government will thread the needle. What does it mean, thread the needle? It means that it will be created whether or not the Israeli or the Palestinian governments are willing to or are supporting it, and it will pass legislation that neither the Israeli nor the Palestinian government will be able to object to veto, because the legislation that will be passed by the entire government of Israel and Palestine will have the opportunity to benefit both the people of Israel and Palestine, and because of that, the Israeli and the Palestinian government will have a hard time legitimately objecting to such proposal for peace. We are asking you to participate, to ask questions, and to hold your comments. You can write, and we are actually encouraging you to write questions on the chat or to ask questions. Nasir will administer the questions. He will also translate your comments into questions. Nasir, can you say hi, please?
Hello, everybody.
Thank you. So Nasir will translate your comments. We're trying to be positive and productive. And so he will translate your comments into questions. We have a short video that explains what the federal government is about. It's a 2-minute short video. I'd like to play it.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations. And instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So we are actually simulating what's in that short video. And before we actually conduct the simulation, by the way, this is a simulation, it's not a lecture. We would like to take a survey now, and we will take a survey at the end of the simulation and ask you, the audience, do you support a federal government, a common federal government for Israel-Palestine? Please vote either yes or no. And we will compare this survey to the survey that we will conduct at the end of the simulation. Please vote either yes or no. If you support the federal government, common federal government for Israel-Palestine, vote yes. If you do not support it, vote no. Okay, please publish the vote. 22 out of 23 voted yes. That's 96%. 1 out of 23 voted no, and that's 4%. Hopefully, the person who voted no will remain with us for the entire simulation, and we'll see at the end of the simulation whether he or she changed his mind regarding this proposal. So at this time, I'd like to stop sharing, and I'm going to give Mr. Beito a short opportunity to make a statement, or an opening statement, and then we will continue with the simulation. So, David, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you great.
That's good. I'm asking because I had trouble with my computer and I had to get my daughters as a backup. So I apologize for being a little late. A little bit about my background. Some of you might be asking, what can a guy who specializes in American history contribute to addressing the current controversy about Israel and Palestine? And I guess I'll have to let you decide for yourselves once you hear what I have to say. First, let me give you a rough take of where I'm coming from on this issue, where I see the problems on the ground, and where I think some possible solutions might be. I think one thing is clear. We need to find long-term solutions that are sustainable based on equality before the law, one person, one vote, and the protections of minorities. Now, let's look at the facts on the ground. I think it's obvious, to me at least, that a two-state solution has become a non-starter. There are almost numberless practical obstacles to it, even if you accept the premise. One of the most important of these is that the settlers are not going anywhere, not without great bloodshed anyway. They are widely dispersed throughout the West Bank. They are armed. They are willing to fight if anybody tries to remove them. This is not like the removal years ago from Gaza, which is just, what, 3,000 people, something like that. You're talking about 500,000. You're talking about hundreds of thousands. Moreover, a lot of those settlers have lived there their entire lives. They have put down deep roots. It's the only home they've ever known. Okay, so that's one fact on the ground. And that leads to me, that alone leads to me to an obvious conclusion. That is that some sort of one state solution is needed. I think, just world, that would have to be a one state solution that has one person, one vote throughout the entire Israel, Palestine. But selling that position is very difficult, I found, especially to Israelis. And they keep coming back to me with a common fear, and that is that they will be outvoted, they will be a minority, and there's sort of an aspect to this where they will no longer be able to express their religious and cultural traditions in ways they find comfortable. So to try to thread the needle, as Joseph says, I wrote an article, which he mentioned, which holds up the possible model of the Confederation of Switzerland. Under that system, as many of you know, you have about 27 co-equal cantons, self-governing. That is where the locus of government is in Switzerland. There is a federal government, but it's relatively weak. And they rotate the president every year. So many Swiss don't even know who their president is, which I kind of like. It provides an outlet for ethnic, linguistic, and religious diversity, of which there is a extensive in Switzerland. It also provides equality under the law, one person, one vote, and freedom of movement. Now, as to the IPC approach, I'm warming up to it. I was skeptical of it, and I'm warming up to it. And I really like what you're all doing. That's maybe understated there, because I think you're filling a very practical role. You're providing a forum for a nuts and bolts discussion of ideas and concerns. And I think one way I would see it too is you're planting seeds that may eventually sprout. Maybe it'll take a long time, but you got to plant the seeds. You got to start somewhere. You got to get the ideas on the table. And these are ideas that I think we all agree on: peace and of equal rights, based on a system of checks and balances, which is what a confederal or a federal system does. Now, briefly, I'm almost done, but do any of the other topics that I study, which are centered on American history, have bearing on this issue? I think that they do. One of the areas where I've done a lot of work is the history of the struggle for human rights in the American South. And there are many parallels to this, to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There was even a debate about one state versus two state solutions. It was always a minority view, but it was out there, and they were players. There were people pushing for an independent Black nation in the South. And fortunately, in my view, that one state or two state solution, did I say it was one state? It was a two-state solution of an independent Black nation, which would coexist presumably with the United States. That failed, right? And most African Americans, the vast majority, chose the one state model, which is the model that we're pushing here to some extent. A model of one person, one vote within a fairly decentralized federal system. So I think there are a lot of very valuable lessons. And lastly, some of my other work, I guess, explains where I'm coming from to some extent as well. I've done a lot of research on decentralized communities, private communities, mutual aid organizations. I wrote a book on fraternal societies, and how people, often very diverse groups, often very poor groups, have gotten together in cooperative form through systems based on consent to solve problems. So those concerns, as well as just what I saw as the facts on the ground, because I've never been to Israel, I don't speak the language, I don't speak Arabic or Hebrew. I'm an outsider, I admit that. But those led me to think more about the Swiss model, which I've heard about before, and to think about possible application here. But whether it's a Swiss model or something else, I think a federal solution is the best way to go, some sort of federal solution. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, David. So we are not proposing what the federal government's policy should be. We are proposing a system of government. It will be up to the people of Israel and Palestine to elect the parliament members, and it will be up to the parliament members in the legislative branch of the federal government to decide on a system on policies, whether to have one state, two state, 39 cantons, Swiss system, whatever. We are not against any other solution. We are proposing a system to actually have an honest discussion about the future of Israel, Palestine, and the discussion will take place by the people who are elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. Those will be parliament members, the president and vice president. So some people asked us, are you a confederation or a federation? We are saying we are both. Israeli, we defined it based on the constitution that is on ipconfederation.org. Now, this is the heart of the simulation. We are asking you to make these assumptions. The first assumption is that we were able to obtain major funding to advertise the idea of a federal government worldwide and in Israel and Palestine, and to recruit parliament members or parliament candidates and candidates to become president and vice president in Israel, Palestine, meaning that we will have a platform for an election, and those parliament members will put themselves out as candidates, and the people of Israel and Palestine will be able to vote after they have been able to debate whether or not a federal government is positive for them. So we need major funding, and we're asking you to assume that we were able to obtain those major funding, and that we are going to have a one-year campaign, and Israelis and Palestinians are running for parliament. I will ask you later whether those assumptions are realistic. I will ask David Beito whether those assumptions are realistic, but we're asking you for the purpose of this simulation to make those assumptions. The second assumption is that 14 million people were given an opportunity to vote. Those are the people in Israel and Palestine, excluding children. That means the people in the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel were adults, were given the opportunity to vote for their parliament members and for the president and vice president. We're also asking you to assume that 5 million people have actually voted. The 3 million Palestinians voted and 2 million Israelis voted. We're asking you to assume that the president received 1.5 million votes. I'm asking you to assume that I was elected as the president. Now, so that it's clear, first of all, I'm not qualified under the Constitution to be president, and I don't intend ever to run for president, but it makes it easier for me to conduct the simulation as we assume from now on that I am the president of the entire area. You also have to assume that a vice president lady was elected by 1.3 million votes, and we will rotate in 2 years. You will also have to assume that 300 parliament members were elected in 300 districts. Those districts are in Gaza, Israel, and the West Bank. And that each district encompasses 47,000 people, and each parliament member represents 47,000 people. So before I go to David, I want to ask you, the audience, do you have any questions regarding these assumptions? You can either put them on the chat or ask them. And
there's a question from Nigel that comes up a lot, so I think it's important. What of the diaspora populations in being vote? Because we know that this is only an election of the people who live inside Israel, Palestine. Is there a reason
Right.
for that, Joseph? Can you tell him just
Correct.
real quick?
This election is in order to qualify to run, and in order to qualify to be to vote, you have to be a citizen of either Israel or Palestine. The Israeli governments have their own citizens, the Palestinian government have their own citizens, and you have to be a resident of Israel and Palestine. So typically speaking, the citizens of Israel and Palestine, they have what is called an identity card. The Israelis have their own identity cards. The Palestinians have their own identity cards. So that first requirements is that they will have to have a citizenship. They will have to have an identity card. And the second requirement is that they will also have to be resident of that area. So, for example, I am a citizen of Israel. I have an Israeli identity card, but I'm not a resident. Therefore, I will not be able to vote, or I will not be able to run. Any other questions before I go to David? Okay, David, do you have any questions or comments regarding these assumptions?
Not really, because I've listened to a few of your simulcasts. I think I have a pretty good idea. And I'm not sure if this is on the assumption, but it is a question about how well is the IPC known in Israel and Palestine, and what steps are being taken to get it better known? And I'm not sure if that's a question that fits in with the assumptions.
Well, right now, it's not very well known at all. I would assume that very tiny minority of people in Israel, Palestine. This goes back to the first assumption, is that we need a year-long campaign to promote the idea and to promote the election. So at this moment, they're not well known. Unfortunately, the Israelis and the Palestinian governments do not take any steps to be creative in making peace. They are basically working on the assumption that somehow in the future there will be two states. But as you said in your opening statement, those are not really realistic ideas. And even if they are realistic ideas, they're not open to any other ideas. Okay, any other questions from the audience regarding these assumptions? All right, so
we have two hands raised. One is Shlomo and the other one is Mike. Can
okay,
we,
Shlomo?
so that we can go into the simulation, because usually general questions should be saved for after the simulation, because we want to get the simulation going. So if you have general comments and questions, we ask that you save it for the discussion part. And then this way we can focus on the simulation and questions just regarding the simulation. Shlomo, did you have something brief?
I will talk later. Thank you.
Thank you, Shlomo.
And Mike, do you have a question regarding the assumptions?
No, just well, briefly, it was just any idea how you would handle the various UN resolutions that have come and gone for the last 40 years or so? How would that be included in your governing philosophy?
We will apply once the federal government is created. It will apply, or it has the option to apply to be recognized by the United Nations. But as far as I know, I'm not a United Nations expert. We do have an expert sometimes on the United Nations. But as far as I know, all the United Nations resolutions have to do with the two states. I don't think there was ever a resolution to create a federal government in Israel, Palestine. But whether or not the United Nations have any such resolutions, it's not material to the creation of a federal government in Israel, Palestine. All right, so I'm going to be asking you, the audience, as part of this simulation, to act as either Israeli or Palestinian parliament members. This is the map. you will have to be representing a district in Israel, Palestine. Your district has 47,000 people. You will have to choose and remain intellectually honest throughout this simulation as to whether you are a Palestinian parliament member or an Israeli parliament member and what district you represent, because we are going to have a discussion about specific legislation, and you may vote yes or no, and part of the discussion will be what area do you actually represent. So at this time, let's ask you to vote whether you are a Palestinian parliament member or an Israeli parliament member in this simulation. Please make your choice. Are you an Israeli parliament member or a Palestinian parliament member? Okay, giving you 5 more seconds. Please publish. 17 Palestinian parliament members and 9 Israeli we have. So please remain so throughout the simulation. You will be given an opportunity to vote yes or no on legislation. I'm also asked, I called Jeff Warner to be Israeli Prime Minister. Jeff, are you here by any chance? He called me just before the simulation and said that he's having problem with the internet. I told him, well, let's wait until the simulations actually start. Apparently, he's not here. So do we have someone who is willing to act in this simulation as Israeli Prime Minister? We need a volunteer to be Israeli Prime Minister.
We also need a volunteer for the Palestinian president because Aziz texted that he would not be able to do it. He's in the car on the freeway or something.
I see. Okay.
Good morning, Joseph and everyone. Yes, I'll be in the freeway very soon, and I have very loud car. So I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
So are you able to be the president of Palestine?
Not while I'm driving. So if you can give it to somebody, that would be
Okay. All right. So we need an Israeli prime minister and a Palestinian president.
I'll be the Israeli prime minister if no one else wants to volunteer. This is Charles.
Okay. Okay. Hi, Charles. And do we have anyone else who wants to be Israeli prime minister? Okay. Do we have someone who is willing to be Palestinian president?
I could do it, Joseph, again.
Okay, Nasir. Terrific. Okay. All right. So the rest of you are either Israeli or Palestinian parliament member. Keep in mind that a lot of the districts are mixed districts, meaning Palestinians and Israelis live together. So you may be asked, what area do you represent? What percentage of your constituents is Israeli? What percentage of your constituents is Palestinians? And you have to act based on the benefit to your district, not based on your personal political views, but really what's best for your district, because that's how you ran for parliament. You said, please vote for me because I will be the best candidate to benefit the district. And I am accepting the Constitution. All right. Let's go to the first order of business, and that is the Constitution. Charles, would you be so kind as to read out the Constitution?
We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
All right. So before we go to David, and then before we ratify the Constitution by asking the Parliament to ratify the Constitution, does anyone have any questions regarding the Constitution? Basically, this is not the entire Constitution. This is just a short, abridged version of the entire Constitution. Does anyone have any questions regarding the Constitution? Nasir, do you see any questions?
No, Joseph, not regarding the Constitution.
Okay, David, do you have any comments regarding the Constitution before we ratify it?
No, I don't really have any comments other than I like the idea of having this forum and getting ideas out there. And I think that the Constitution will help do that.
Well, the Constitution gives us legitimacy to the Parliament members and basically create rules of engagement for the future for all of us. It basically is a way to create a transparency in our conduct in the future. All right. So let's ask the Palestinian Parliament members to ratify the Constitution. You must ratify the Constitution. You ran to be Parliament member. You must ratify the Constitution. If you do not ratify the Constitution, you will be expelled from the Parliament. You will not be able to vote. All right. We need all the Palestinian Parliament members to ratify the Constitution. We have 22 Palestinian Parliament members in this simulation. I only see 15 voting. We need all of you to vote. You can't just decide not to vote. I know I'm kind of being imposing this on you, but in reality, all the Parliament members who ran must ratify the Constitution.
While they're voting, can you, there's a question regarding point 6. 1, 2. We voluntarily give the legislators and government of Israel the veto power.
Right.
So this is a question from Nigel. He's asking about the veto power. And this is a question that does actually come up.
So we give them a veto power on every legislation that violates their sovereignty. If the legislation violates their sovereignty, they are given a veto power. If it doesn't violate their sovereignty, they do not have a veto power. I also forgot to mention that the Constitution does not preclude the Israeli or the Palestinian governments from, can you publish the vote on the Palestinian Parliament members? The Constitution does not preclude the Israeli or the Palestinian government from agreeing to anything. They can agree to everything they want, and constitutionally, we are required to accept their agreement. So if they agree to a 2-state or 1-state, constitutionally, we are prohibited from undermining those agreements, and we must accept the agreements between the Israeli and the Palestinian government. All right, let's go to the Israeli Parliament members. Please vote. Israeli Parliament members. I don't see these. Okay, yeah. put the Israeli parliament members. So that you know, I see the voting going on. I am not allowed to vote. The Israeli prime minister is not allowed to vote. The Palestinian parliament president is not allowed to vote. But I see the voting as it is being progressed and until and then you see it when it's published. Okay, let's have the Israeli publish the votes on the Israeli parliament members. All of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation, and all of the Palestinian parliament members who voted voted in favor of this constitution. So congratulations. This is a momentous event in the history of the Middle East. It has never been done before. In the history of the Middle East, there has never been a parliament that was elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. In fact, not only by the people of Israel and Palestine, all the history, in the entire history of that area had never elected a common democracy for the entire population. So this is a momentous occasion in the history of humanity. And we should be congratulating ourselves for doing so. The election and the constitution that was just passed undermines the existing governments, meaning the Israeli and the Palestinian government, use of fear and hate to justify their action. We basically undermine that. It removes the collective stigma against Israelis and Palestinians that we are unable to make peace, that we are enemies forever, and we will remain enemies. That stigma has been removed just now by having a common constitution for the entire area that has never been done in the history of humanity. It gives the parliament, it gives the president, me, huge political capital that I intend and we intend to use in order to benefit the people of Israel and Palestine. It compels the government, because 5 million people have voted. It compels the governments of the world and other organizations to contribute financially and politically and economically to our government. It gives the Israeli and the Palestinian people self-image, new self-image, that we are people who want peace, that we want to coexist based on fairness for all of us. It proves that the Israeli and Palestinians are not a monolithic society, meaning that some Palestinians voted, some Israelis voted. We are not a monolithic society. We can decide what's good for us, not based on nationality, based on our interest as the people of Israel and Palestine. So this is a momentous occasion in the history of humanity. Okay, the first order of business, that relates to the first, one of the questions about the veto power, is granting a veto power to the separate governments. So we are now the parliament. We have we've been elected. We have a constitution, and now we are passing our first legislation. And the first legislation is to grant a veto power to the separate governments. Charles, would you be so kind enough as to read this legislation? By the way, Libby is not with us until January.
Granting a veto power to the separate governments. The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision for peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel, on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian government on issues in which it is indispensable. In the event of changes in the entirety of the Israeli or Palestinian governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed subject to the IPC Constitution. The Parliament will decide on indispensability. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively.
So this legislation or proposed legislation basically says we're only going to give a veto power to the Israeli and the Palestinian government on issues in which they are indispensable. If they are dispensable, they do not get a veto power. They only get a veto power if they are indispensable. So example, if we're passing legislation about the use of land or about having a mutual police force or removal of the wall, the Israeli and the Palestinian governments are indispensable, and therefore they get a veto power. However, if we pass legislation relating to our budget, or ratifying our constitution, or appointing ministers or judges, or applying to the United Nations, or creating our own passports, or our own peace agreements, the Israeli and the Palestinian governments are dispensable and they do not get a veto power. So why do we give them a veto power? Because a veto power provides a safety net to both sides. They still like their governments. They think their governments protects them. And because those governments have a veto power, then it provides a safety net to the government and to the people of Israel and Palestine. It increases the likelihood, the veto power increases the likelihood of Israelis and Palestinian participation in the federal government, in voting. It decreases the Israel and Palestinians government's opposition. They don't really have any rational basis upon which to object to the federal government because they get a veto power on matters in which they are indispensable, on matters that they have sovereignty. It removes any claims that the IPC has a subversive intentions. We are not seeking to undermine the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. And the proof of that is that we give them a veto power. It gives legal protection to the candidates, the Israeli and the Palestinian candidates, that they will safely run for parliament and they will not be arrested or prosecuted by the Israeli or Palestinian authorities because they, on the false pretense that they are trying to undermine the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. It compels the IPC to thread the needle to find the least objectionable legislation. And it creates a platform for negotiation with a deadline. So before we go to voting, does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation? Nasir, do we have any questions about this legislation?
Well, the issue, there's a few questions regarding the veto again, and let me, if you don't mind, can I answer it? Because
Sure.
I used to be against the veto. When I first joined the IPC for probably the first year, I was like, why have this veto? It doesn't make any sense. And later, I discovered that it does make sense because the IPC is not to replace the government of Israel and Palestine. It is a separate government, and any government such as Israel and Palestine is not going to accept to be controlled or ruled or dictated by an outside entity. So for that reason, it lures these governments to participate in the confederation. And secondly, it creates a strategy that if one government, like for example, say you have a radical government that's in control of Israel, which is what we have now, if it doesn't cooperate with the IPC and the situation deteriorates into political instability and war, then that can be used as public pressure to get these governments to abide because they'll see, the people will see that they have a solution, a way out, and that their leaders are not following that. So it makes sense in those terms because no government is going to accept a outside government to come and dictate its terms and control it.
Correct.
And if there is possibility to add one more thing, brothers, this is the first time that we Palestinians and Israelis talking together. And that's never happened before because everybody's taken the decision for us before. Now the people will be taking decisions. And one of the main things that we're doing it is it's happening in the United States of America. Where is the power of the United States of America to turn off everything today by calling the Prime Minister of Israel? They will do everything that they can. So doing it in America with Palestinians and Israelis together, that will make a big difference. And let the people talk for themselves.
Right.
Okay, let's go
David,
ahead.
do you have any questions or comments regarding before we vote on the veto power? David?
Professor David, you're muted. So if you were speaking, we can't hear you.
No, I think it's necessary to the plan for the reasons you've outlined.
All right. Hearing no other questions, I'm going to ask the Palestinian parliament members. Palestinian parliament members, please vote on this legislation granting a veto power. Palestinian parliament members, do you vote yes or no? This is only for Palestinian parliament members. We need 55% of you to grant the veto power to support this legislation. Publish the vote. 100% of those who voted in favor of this legislation, and it's also more than 55% of the total number of Palestinian parliament members. Let's have the Israeli parliament members please vote. Do you support this legislation for veto power? Israeli parliament members. Okay, publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli, we need 55%, we get 100%. So that's good. So this legislation has passed. I show share results, so I don't know what it means, but I guess you all see the vote. All right, let's go to our next legislation, and that's temporary IPC exclusive jurisdiction over the Gaza Strip. Nasir, can you read this legislation?
Yeah, give me 1 second. Yes, temporary IPC exclusive jurisdiction over the Gaza Strip. The IPC is the sole legitimately elected government in the Gaza Strip for a period of 1 year. The Palestinian people will work during that time to have an election for a Palestinian government. The Israeli government controls Gaza, but was never chosen by its residents. The existing Palestinian government was not elected by the Palestinian people. The IPC will continue to serve as the federal government for the entire region of Israel and Palestine, retaining exclusive authority over the Gaza Strip until a Palestinian government is elected. All legislative, executive, and judicial decisions concerning the Gaza Strip will be made by the entire IPC government in line with the IPC Constitution. The government of Israel and Palestine.
Please mute yourself.
Yeah, let me mute him 1 second. There it goes. The number 5, let me read number 5 again. All legislative, executive, and judicial decisions concerning the Gaza Strip will be made by the entire IPC government in line with the IPC Constitution. The government of Israel and Palestine are given the veto power.
All right, there is an error in this legislation. We need to correct it.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Okay. So the Palestinian.
Nothing happened.
The IPC is the sole legitimately elected government in the Gaza Strip, period. Should have caught it, I'm sorry.
You,
the
you might,
IPC
I don't know if you want to keep line, point 3, because you're saying the existing Palestinian government was not elected by the Palestinian people. That's not technically true.
it was elected 16 years ago.
Yes, but it was still elected. The Palestinian Authority.
Okay, the existing Palestinian government was elected.
And there's also been like municipal elections and other things. So some of the representatives are actually people who have been elected. So it's kind of misleading. And I mean, I as Palestinian president would be like very not happy with that statement.
How about if I put recently? No, the existing Palestinian government
You could
was
say
not
national,
elected by
the
the
existing national.
Israeli people. How is that?
I'm sorry, you want to put that it was not elected by the Israeli people?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, it's true.
The IPC will continue to serve as the federal government for the entire region of Israel and Palestine, retaining exclusive authority for a period of 1 year. Over the Gaza Strip until the Palestinian government is elected. Is that okay? So we are proposing that the federal government will have exclusive jurisdiction over the Gaza Strip for a period of 1 year until a Palestinian government is elected, but we have to constrain ourselves within the Constitution, meaning that the government of Israel and Palestine will still have veto power over legislation that affects their sovereignty.
We have 2 questions, Rob and Charles. Is it
Okay, Rob.
if it's in regards to this legislation?
Okay, Rob.
Yes, I'm interested in terms of whether with this simulation, what latitude there is for discussion, because I have a concern about this particular point. Is that a thing that we can discuss, or are we wanting to just proceed based upon the simulation?
Yeah, Rob, what we do typically in our simulations is that we first do the simulation of proposing these laws, voting on them to see how the Confederation works. After we're done, we'll have a question and answer period where you can comment, you can ask, like, for example, Professor David said something that I'm very interested in asking him about, but it has nothing to do with the legislation. So we're going to wait for the discussion period.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. George, did you have a question?
Yes, when does this temporary exclusive jurisdiction begin? Is this after an election? After there has been an election by the 5 million or the 14 million people? When does this begin?
The temporary exclusive jurisdiction begin as soon as voting take place and until the Israeli and the Palestinian governments were given a chance to veto the legislation. And
why wouldn't it be the current, I mean, why gives the IPC, what gives the IPC priority to have jurisdiction here, say, rather than the Palestinian Authority, which would have much more, in my opinion, would have much more affinity to Gaza?
Yes. And this is the reason, George, when this legislation was first proposed, there was no timeline set, but it was actually the Palestinian participants who asked for a 1-year timeline, because you understand that there has to be a transition period to go from war to Palestinian Authority control. So the question here is that the Palestinian government eventually will be the ones to take over once they have to, it's a transition period of 1 year. So this is not a permanent solution for Gaza. And that was the concern that the Palestinians did mention when this legislation was first introduced.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. I'm gonna have Professor Beito make his comments after we vote. And after we have the Israeli and the Palestinian governments have the opportunity to veto. By the way, I believe that under the Constitution, they have 60 days to veto legislation. Let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote. Palestinian parliament members. Publish the vote. 89% of the Palestinian parliament members voted yes. Let's have the Israeli parliament members vote. Publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli parliament members who voted yes. So let's go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
Acting as though I am the current prime minister, yes, I will veto it.
And your reasons are?
Well, we would, to be quite frank, we would like to annex northern Gaza, and we do not want to cede military control over that area. And we want to be able to supervise directly any rebuilding and reconstruction and governing in the whole of Gaza. So we see
And what do you intend to do with the 2 million Gazans that are in there?
Well, our thinking on that matter is not very precise. Basically, we'll just try to crowd them into the southern half of Gaza, and you know, as long as we can get away with it in terms of the world community in the United States, will continue to make their lives even more miserable.
Are there any ways we can amend this legislation to remove your veto?
Possibly, but I would have to see it. It would involve having direct Israeli participation alongside the IPC.
Well, so you would be willing to remove your forces from the Gaza Strip if we cooperate with you in terms of security?
Yeah, we would like to see you cooperate with us in terms of security and have you be another buffer, but that doesn't necessarily translate into us removing our military forces wherever we see fit.
Okay, so let me go to the Palestinian president before I am the president of the whole area. So first I want to talk to the president of Palestine and see what he thinks. Is he going to veto this legislation? And then I'll go back to the Prime Minister of Israel.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that Charles is it seems that he's portraying not the prime minister but the finance minister, but with his views of coming out so clear about his intent to occupy and annex northern Gaza. I don't even think Netanyahu has said this publicly. But as Palestinian president, I would not. And the reason why I don't is because we have presented our ideas on this legislation, and it was accepted that it's for a limited time while we allow our government to return and reestablish its authority over the Gaza Strip.
All right, so the president of Palestine has not vetoed this. The prime minister of Israel vetoed it. I am the only legitimate president of this whole area. We are the only legitimate government in this whole area. So I'm going back to the prime minister of Israel and ask him to remove his veto, because unless you do so, I will have no choice but to try to undermine you worldwide and in the Israeli political process, and have someone else that that would be elected that would remove his veto.
My response would be pretty much the same, because my current power base that I rely on, and which personally I need in order to stay aloof from various corruption charges, would not accept this situation that you're proposing. And I might be, amenable if there was enough obvious support amongst the Israeli people for it that forced my hand. But short of that, I would resist your efforts, and definitely would try to undermine you.
2 million people, 2 million Israeli people have voted for our government. The people that you rely on, most of them do not serve in the Gaza Strip. Most people that are serving in the Gaza Strip, most of them support your opponent. So basically, if you refuse to remove your veto, I think that your chances of being elected, because now you are forcing the people of Israel to be controlling 2 million people and having a war situation forever with 2 million people and reoccupying Gaza. And you know very well that that has not worked for you before. So to make a long story short, I'm just gonna, this is to show how the federal government will work. It's not to show that, to convince the prime minister of Israel. So let's go to.
If I could just add, if this is a 60-day process where this proposal first comes about, and then I have 60 days to veto it, within that 60 days, if my political situation becomes untenable to force what I previously said to come about, then I would obviously be more amenable to not vetoing.
Okay, so you are asking for an extension.
Yeah, I might ask for an extension at the end of 60 days even.
All right, let's go to David Beito. Do you have any comments regarding this exclusive jurisdiction over the Gaza Strip legislation?
Well, I think that if we did have the Israeli prime minister here, he would at least pretend to have different positions. It would be very interesting to see what positions he would state. I don't think he would state that he needs to he's against this because he needs to stay in office. He would never admit that. Now that might be true. I mean, I'm for the proposal because there's obviously there's a vacuum here. There's a vacuum here of solutions, and nobody the Israelis are just unchecked. The Palestinians are helpless, and there's nobody out there proposing a possible way out that would potentially give something to both sides, would take this problem off the hands of both sides. That might be a rational motivation for Israelis. Like, they're tired of this. This just keeps dragging on for decades. The Gaza crisis in various forms. Maybe they want a way out.
David, you said that you're warming up to the IPC. Does this, the process that you've seen up to now, the do we win you over at this time? Does this show demonstrate to you how the IPC could be a political powerhouse that will make changes in Israel-Palestine?
I would say yes. And again, when I go out there proposing the Swiss model, it feels like a parlor game, and that's what it is. And we need to get people discussing these solutions, nuts and bolts discussions, proposals, alternatives. And I think the idea of a parallel government that supersedes the two other governments in some sense is a good way to go.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's go to the next legislation, and that is rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel. Nasir, can you read out this legislation, and then we'll go to the legislation submitted by David, proposed legislation for Swiss-style canton, and I'll ask you, David, to read it out. But let's go to rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel. Nasir,
Sure.
can you please read it out and take over for a few minutes?
Sure. So the proposal is rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel. The IPC is the only legitimate government in Israel and Palestine consisting of 300 members elected by the entire population. Approximately 125 members represent the destroyed areas. The IPC is committed to the well-being of all people, including the 5 million individuals directly affected by the violence since October 7th. The IPC believes that the future of the Gaza and the Israeli people is interconnected. It is unlikely that the Israeli and the Palestinian governments will be able to restore a normal, peaceful existence in the foreseeable future. The IPC is requesting a $50 billion grant from the international community, which includes Israel and Palestine, to fund and coordinate the rebuilding of the devastated areas. The IPC will prioritize the following. 1. The IPC is calling for an immediate ceasefire and the immediate return of all political prisoners in Israel and Palestine to their homes. 2. Rebuilding thousands of homes, roads, hospitals, civic buildings, and infrastructures to facilitate the immediate return of all people to their homes. 3. Restoring law and order and civil societies that have been destroyed. The government of Israel and Palestine are given a veto power. Before we vote, does anybody have any questions? And if there's no questions, let the Israeli members vote.
This is George.
I'm
I have
sorry.
a question.
Yeah. What's up, George? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious, let's say assuming you get the $50 billion or whatever, who's going to be controlling this and the process of rebuilding?
Okay. So this is an IPC. Now, this does not hinder or stop any other efforts that are being built, but this is an IPC initiative. So it is not the only solution in regards to repairing Gaza. It is one of them.
Okay. But as far as I understand it, even after the election, the IPC has no territorial control of either constituent of the IPC. So how is it going to do construction if it has no territorial control?
Okay, I think that you need to understand that the IPC is a separate government. Israeli and Palestinian governments still exist. So the IPC is a separate government that represents both the Israelis and Palestinian people. It is not a replacement for either of them.
No, I understand, but how, okay, the IPC has $50 billion to spend. It's got to build in Gaza. How is it going to build in Gaza if it doesn't control the territory?
Can I answer that?
Sure, Aziz. Joseph.
Is that okay, Joseph?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You see, as a Palestinian speaking, a lot of people does not understand where is this idea coming from. This idea coming from the power of people who's elected by separate way of election. Whatever we have today in Gaza and Israel and Palestine, everybody is elected by the Palestinian, and these guys are some of them elected, some of them not, and they are in control. This is the first time in history there is somebody come with an idea that we both Palestinian and Israelis can elect somebody and can have the democratic legal legitimacy to be part of the solution. And that's why it does not matter who I am and where I am. If I am elected by my district and my district want me to be there, I can enforce things by my elected power. So this is a unique way of approaching the conflict by allowing the people to elect their federal government or their common government and work together as people in the same occupied land.
I understand that.
Yeah, but George,
thank you.
let me ask you, George, you're saying that they don't have it. Like, for example, there's thousands of UN agencies that do aid and rehabilitation and things in countries. Having sovereignty and control over the land does not necessarily a requirement for any type of effort to
The UN has
reconstruct.
lost all its capacity.
Okay. So we're gonna go to the legislature. We
So
answered
what
the
is-
George,
my
George,
question?
What is your
answered,
question?
we answered the question, but you're gonna pull up things like the UN lost its credibility. So in this case, we don't feel we explained that the IPC is a separate government. The Israeli and the Palestinian government still exist. So I think that we did answer the question. So can we move to can we
George,
have these?
we are the federal government of this area. We have the jurisdiction over this whole area of Israel, Palestine. So what's the question?
Can we move?
Okay,
Can we move to a vote?
you have Rob asking.
Okay, go ahead, Rob. Do you have a question?
Yeah, on a similar vein, but not the practicalities of being in control of the land, but I don't understand how you can rebuild if there's a conflict about who are you rebuilding for, who's actually going to live there. The rebuilding will have to take that into account. So you've got to solve that problem first.
Yeah, and that's why in the legislature, if you see the immediate ceasefire and the return of political prisoners, and then the restoring of law and order, as well as the rebuilding of the homes and people to return to their homes.
But there is no conflict. There is no conflict. We are the people of Israel and Palestine who want to rebuild. What is the conflict?
Well, the conflict comes back to, I think, what Charles was saying at the beginning with his veto, in that I would assume that Israel would want to rebuild for their own for Israeli citizens.
We are willing to comply with Israeli and Palestinian structural engineering laws and with their whatever system they wish to have regarding the rebuilding. We'll work with the Israeli and the Palestinian, just like with any city. If they have certain requirements, we are willing to work with them, but there is no conflict. We are the people of Israel and Palestine, and we want to build for the people of Israel and Palestine in Gaza and in Southern Israel.
Okay.
Now, if the
okay.
Israeli government and the Palestinian government wish to interfere with our activity,
leave it at this. Yeah, I think let me leave it at this stage then. There is a concern, but perhaps I don't understand fully what the role is. But we can come back to that later, or
we
have an
are the
outside
only
discussion.
legitimate government in Israel, Palestine, in the West Bank and Gaza. If the Israeli and the Palestinian government wish to interfere, then we will work with them as much as necessary. If they wish to continue to interfere, we have the right to withhold funding from the areas upon which they are interfering until they remove their interference, their unreasonable interference. If it's reasonable, we'll work with them. All right, let's have
there's
Margaret.
Margaret, go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah, if all that money is given to the IPC, isn't the IPC in charge of distributing maybe some to the Israeli, maybe some to the Palestinians, maybe to global contractors? They make the decision who gets the contract on their presentations of what their rebuilding will look like. Thank you for considering that.
Okay.
As far as engineering requirements, as far as legitimate structural requirements, we have no problem. We will
Professor-
work with the local authority, with the Israeli and the Palestinian governments, but we are going to provide the funding as long as the conversation with us, as long as the policies with us is reasonable. If it's not reasonable, if it's not beneficial to the people of Israel and Palestine, we are not going to provide them the funding for rebuilding. They will have to do it themselves.
Yeah. Professor David, did you have a question before we
Yeah,
voted?
I'm just thinking, I don't know how you'd word this, but just requesting 50 billion, it's like, people are gonna like, okay, fine. But if you were to go to people and say, look, we've got this proposal here to rebuild, and let's assume that, for example, it is not vetoed by the Israeli and Palestinian governments, will you, Mr. Billionaire, Mrs. Billionaire, contribute $100,000 in that eventuality? So that way you're raising money, you're going to people and you're saying, will you pledge to give a certain amount if this is, if this goes through? Am I making any sense? It's sort of a conditional thing. And it's a motivator for people to give money.
David, you are the president of the United States. And I come to you and I say, Mr. President, we are asking for $50 billion grant. We know you can't give us 50 billion. We know that you have been giving Israel billions of dollars for wars, but we're asking for several $1 billion for peace. How much money are you going to give us?
And I think that the president would be more motivated to make a pledge if it was conditional. Okay, let's say you're able to get $50 billion in pledges from different people, and you're able to get agreement from the Israeli and Palestinian governments not to veto this. You're more likely to say, okay, I'll give you, X amount of money. But if you just come into them without an inducement, they're less likely to listen to you.
Okay, so Mr. Prime Minister of Israel, the President of the United States is willing to give us X amount of billions of dollars. Are you going to remove your veto power? Are you going to still veto the legislation?
I would probably welcome anybody spending money on Gaza if it means I don't have to spend as much. Sure. We can always,
So you will not have a veto on this legislation?
No, but I might want to be assured by the IPC that this didn't mean I had to relinquish security control unless I felt that was okay to do so.
And Mr. President of Palestine, will you just heard that the President of the United States is willing to give us X billion of dollars to rebuild. Are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I accept this legislation.
Okay, did we vote on this yet?
Actually, we didn't even vote on it. Oh, we got sidetracked.
Okay, let's vote on it.
So let's vote. Let's do Israeli members first. Can we put up a vote on yes or no on this legislation?
Who is voting now?
This is the Israeli parliament members only.
Okay.
We got carried away with the questions and comments. Sorry, people.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting concept that Professor David presented, is like to go to the leaders so that this can kind of save a lot of time with legislation, because if we know that they're not going to veto it in advance, we set up the laws to be acceptable, it will almost guarantee that all laws will pass, no problem.
Correct. It's kind of a variation of the matching fund idea.
Yes.
In a way.
Let's go to the Palestinian parliament members, please vote.
And by the way, it was 80 to 20%. So
yeah,
for the Israeli parliament. Palestinian people, please vote. Our parliament members.
Okay, publish the
And-
vote.
and Publish the vote, 93% yes, 7% no.
Okay, terrific. So let's go to David now. I made the changes, I think I made the changes that you required to your legislation. So David, this is legislation that Professor David Beito is proposing. David, you want to read it? I'll flip the page to part 2 and part 3 when it's necessary.
Sure. Proposed legislation for a Swiss-style canton system, part 1. Informed by the knowledge that the Confederation of Switzerland has provided a durable system which fosters peaceful coexistence, economic freedom, voting rights, and religious freedom, and has lasted for centuries, the Parliament of the Israeli Palestinian Confederation endorses the following reforms. The combined territory of Israel and Palestine will henceforth be divided into 35 cantons, each with co-equal sovereign, I thought I'd taken out sovereign because that's sort of a red flag, each with co-equal and complete local governing power. Cantonal boundaries will be determined by a task force to be appointed by the parliament and will be composed of an equal number of Palestinians and Israelis. Each canton enjoys complete, and again, I'd change that to local control. Each canton enjoys complete local control except for powers expressly delegated to or retained by the Israeli and Palestinian Confederation. The representatives for each cantonal legislature are elected through one person, one vote, and selected on the basis of population proportionality. Each canton retains distinct powers of taxation. Each canton exercises complete local authority unless expressly limited by the Israeli and Palestinian Confederation over education, law enforcement, the regulation of land use, public welfare, and infrastructure. Each canton guarantees absolute freedom of religion and cannot impose any religious, political, or ethnic test. As in Switzerland, cantons can designate official languages, official religions, or official churches, though exercise of these powers must be consistent with freedom of religion and the equal protection of religious institutions, structures, and sites. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation guarantees both the unhindered right of free movement between cantons and automatic retention by citizens of voting, religious, and other constitutional rights if they exercise that right. The Israeli and Palestinian government are hereby given a veto power to exercise in the next 60 days.
All right. Does anyone have any questions of David regarding this proposed legislation?
Is it me, or does it seem to give the Israel-Palestine Confederation more authority over the than what it has now, than what it's proposing?
I don't know. It might even give it a little bit less authority because it is devolving power. It is calling for a devolving power down to this level of whatever I chose there. 35 is what I chose. Switzerland has 27 cantons.
Okay.
And it has about 9 million people. Israel, Palestine have about 14 million people. They're very comparable in size, geographical size, and population. So I just upped the number of cantons.
The other thing that's missing from the proposal that is a serious concern to especially the Palestinians is in regards to right of return and immigration policy. And I'm assuming that in your presentation that the cantons, would they be responsible for the immigration? Like if Palestinians from Lebanon want to return, what would be the solution for in this proposal?
Well, I could also come up with other issues. like, for example, the issue of compensation. This is a system where the settlers can stay in place. They don't have to leave. They can keep where they are, and then they can coexist with their neighbors in peace. I think that's an advantage of it. But then the disadvantage of that is the issue of compensation. So I think you certainly would want to provide compensation to the original landowners. So that's another issue I'd raise. I mean, those are all important issues that I'm trying
Yeah,
to
but
focus
this is a
on.
solution. But this is a solution for the Palestinians and Israelis that live on the land. But remember, we have half the Palestinian population in diaspora. We also have 7.5 million Jews, half the Jewish population that don't live in Israel, that have a right of return. So this is something that has to be addressed regarding what is acceptable for both people for the right of return.
I certainly agree that it has to be addressed. I'm not sure if this resolution is the way to do it, because it is. It's pretty long and fairly complicated. I would certainly be open to changes in the resolution that address those issues.
Okay.
But then you're opening up a lot of other questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I recommend I can send you an organization who uses this very similar Emmanuel. Has Emmanuel Shahaf been here, Joseph, before? Has he been a guest?
Who?
Emmanuel Shahaf?
Yes.
Okay, because very similar to his proposal, but in their well, actually, well, not him. It was Rafi Gazelle. His proposal. He has an actual where there's a fixed equal number for the right of return that it's and for both Jews and Palestinians.
Is this the Federation movement?
He used to be part of the Federation movement, but then he kind of developed his own that he specifically addresses the immigration policy. Because
Yeah,
I'm just saying,
I'd be very interested in seeing.
yeah, I'll send that.
I didn't know that movement was still active because I haven't seen anything by them in a while.
Let's hear from Charles. Do you have a question, Charles?
Yeah. This, to me, as it wraps up, and then you give the veto power to the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. I have a question about that, because it seems to me that this is a proposal that has to do with the configuration of the IPC. And that is something that the IPC decides. I would not see that a veto power should be extended to the Israeli and the Palestinian governments in this case. There is a possible conflict.
But they are indispensable. You cannot create a territory while they are in control.
Well, as you envisioned it, Joseph, you said something like 40,000 people per. I forget.
47,000 per district.
Right. So the configuration of the districts, the voting, and all that kind of stuff, that is foundational to how the IPC is created and constituted, and that is not, we don't foresee, I don't think, giving the Israeli or the Palestinian governments a veto power over that, because otherwise they would say, no, we don't want you to come into existence, forget this, right? And they would veto it, and that would be, oh, okay, then I guess we don't exist. So that's the only thing that hit me about this. Obviously, the other things that Nasir brought up too, but I like the way this approaches the thing. I think it would be good to kind of look at and see if there's something we want to adopt into maybe the constitution of the IPC, or the first legislation that the IPC passes, something like that.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments regarding this before we take a vote? Nasir, do you see any questions or comments on this?
No,
Looks
just
like
David. David has his hand up.
Waving his hand.
Yeah, I think that the part there that I think is interesting and makes it saleable more to, and again, you've got to sort of have them feel like, oh, we got to, the Israeli majority's got to feel like we've got to compromise somehow. They got to feel that pressure. But it gives them something in the sense that if the local cantons are able to have, as in Switzerland, official churches, official languages, perhaps even privileged official cultural traditions, you could have potentially several mini Jewish states in a way, right? Within that context. And that gives something to somebody who is a Zionist, at least a cultural Zionist, that has this unique feeling of unique religious connection to the land. You say, well, your canton has an official, is officially a Jewish state, let's say. But again, a Jewish state in the sense of equality before the law. And again, that's not such an odd thing if you think of the Swiss model, where they have official churches and they have in the context of religious freedom. So I think that could be a selling point, for me it is, to the other side, in a certain sense, the Israeli majority, especially if they feel put upon and pressured that we got to compromise somehow.
Can I ask David a question about the Swiss model?
Yeah.
So in the Swiss model, where there are different cantons, are there different official churches within like the various cantons, so that different cantons would have different official churches?
Yeah, exactly. There's some that are Catholic and some that are, Lutheran. Yes. And they have official languages too. Okay. I think there are 3, or is it 4 languages that are commonly spoken in Switzerland. So some of them have official languages. So this gets away. It's not a secular. In some sense, you could say that the IPC is you want the federal government to be secular, but this gives an outlet to this religious expression that I think, there's precedent for it, and it might offer something.
Before we take a vote.
Yeah, I have another question for Professor David.
Go ahead, Nasir.
So when you have that the different cantons are set up, and you actually mentioned something regarding that it could be several, like for example, several like religious Jewish canton versus, say, for example, like Tel Aviv versus like Gush Etzion, for example. Gush Etzion is going to be a lot more religious. It's going to be a lot more this. But the other issue you have is that this is something that was actually discussed, because, as you know, in Israel, there's a situation between secular versus religious. And I feel that sometimes something like this can ignite more tensions between religious and secular. And the other issue is when you have the taxing, when you say that each canton will be responsible for its taxation, this could be for a problem, because, of course, incomes in developed areas like Tel Aviv, they feel like, hey, we're paying the price for the defense of the country, for the social services. Meanwhile, the religious communities are living off of the welfare, and because they're going to school and doing religious studies rather than serving the army and paying taxes. So by saying that taxing authorities are going to be done by the canton, you're going to have cantons that are extremely poor and other cantons that are going to be a lot richer.
I say distinct. I mean, I hedged that a little bit, because that's the way it is in Switzerland too. You do have a federal government, you have a federal welfare system. So this is a little bit of a mix, but they have distinct taxation power, meaning they will have their own source of funds that would not rule out a federal taxation power.
Before we take a vote, I am the president, and I'd like to state my position. I don't have the right to vote as a parliament member, but I have the right to express my position on this legislation. I am very much against this legislation because I think it undermines the IPC. It not only undermines the IPC, it also undermines the ideology, the philosophy of the IPC. The IPC is about people. It's not about boundaries. It's about being a secular government, not integrating religion and government. I am very concerned that if we create cantons, they will become enemies of each other. The idea is to have a system where the people of Israel and Palestine have a mechanism to live together and to make decisions together, And the problem with the Israeli-Palestinian issue is the politicization of religion and the creation of boundaries. So I think this is against our ideology, against our philosophy. And so as president, I would be very much against this legislation.
I
let's-
agree. I, as a Palestinian, agree
Yeah.
100% with
You know,
you.
yeah, and like I said, I think that during the general, when we have our general discussion after the thing, I'm gonna, with all due respect for Professor David, I'm gonna say some things maybe in regards to some of this, your approach
Or
as well as,
let's take a vote.
yeah, let's do that.
Can I say
Palestinian,
one last thing and then?
Sure.
yes, yeah, sorry, go ahead and.
Yeah, that has not been the negative picture you're painting has not been the experience in Switzerland. Switzerland had, in many ways, worse experience with religious wars during the Reformation, bloody conflict than anything we have seen recently in Israel, Palestine. I mean, you had dictatorships like by Calvin in Geneva and so forth. So this system arose in part response to that. And I don't think Switzerland really fits that image of a country that has this kind of bitter ethnic conflict. I think you have more of a kind of feeling there of people getting along. You have people of various ethnic groups, religious groups have served as president without controversy. In fact, there's a very small Swiss minority. I think that's the current president. It's no big deal. And the boundaries are not religious, they are geographical. They will have religious context in the sense that people will tend to settle different places, right? But they're small, so you have freedom of movement, people can move out. So I think that the actual experience that we have is a success story by comparison to other models I've seen with Switzerland.
When was the Swiss model created?
It goes back, hundreds of years, and it sort of was a creation from the ground up where you have cantons sort of developing very loosely federated. But it goes back, certainly goes back hundreds of years, and it was a slow process of development that even predates the Reformation in some sense, but helped to prevent Switzerland from suffering some of the worst of the religious conflict once it got going. Because you have something for everybody.
Were the cantons preceded Switzerland?
Yeah, to some extent, I think that's true. Yes.
Okay. So it's not a similar situation. We don't have cantons in Israel, Palestine. It's basically artificially creating cantons into the system of Israel, Palestine. I think it makes sense for cantons to create a federal system, but it's going to, in my opinion, be very, very difficult in the context of Israel, Palestine, where religion is so strong to and the question of boundaries and the question of borders and is so strong. So it's, to me, it sounds like it's a Switzerland is a solution that was created before there was Switzerland. If I make myself clear, I don't know.
Yeah, but that's true for a lot of federal systems in the world, where they borrow models from other countries and they don't necessarily have the same historical traditions.
Yeah.
So I don't think that singles out Switzerland that it has to be developed in that way, but I think the parallels are really there. And you said religion is intense. You just said that, and I agree with you. This is a way to put it into more productive channels, I think.
Look, I am from a city in Israel that is adjacent to Tel Aviv. The city is called Ramat Gan. The city is adjacent to an ultra-Orthodox city called Bnei Brak. If you drive 1 block from Ramat Gan to Bnei Brak, it's like walking into a different world. So the idea that Bnei Brak would be separate canton, then my city, in my opinion, creates artificial boundaries, and it could be dangerous boundaries between religious Jews and secular Jews. I lived in a secular city. Bnei Brak is an Orthodox city. I don't think that we want to create enemies based on cantons. If we have cantons, they would be enemies of each other, in my opinion.
Well, Phil Saunders, I
And
think
if
you've
you
had him
allow
on,
me,
and I would invite you to consider having him on again, because he lives along the Green Line, and he says, the people in that community have developed trading relationships with Palestinians, who in turn have developed trading relationships with settlers. So he has a much more benign view, the potential for trading relationships, for exchanges, for that kind of thing. And in a certain sense, people are going to be less paranoid because they are going to have some political protection. So it creates maybe a more self-confidence and less fear of engaging in these relationships. And again, I would point to the Swiss example.
Maybe.
Yeah.
if you allow me, Joseph,
Let's take a
regarding-
vote. Oh, Walter, you want to?
I may have missed the reason for having 35 and also for having an equal number of Palestinians and Israelis.
Well, I don't know if I said equal number. I mean, I said in the committee to draw it up. But 35 is somewhat arbitrary. There are 27 in Switzerland. Switzerland is a population, I'm taking this off the top of my head, they're about 9 million. Palestine is a population about 14 million. So I just upped the number somewhat arbitrarily to fit that population difference.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a vote. Palestinian parliament members, please vote on this proposed legislation about canton. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. We need 55%.
Hmm.
5 more seconds to vote. End the polling. 60% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Israeli parliament members, please vote. Dan, I don't see the, oh, okay. Israeli parliament members. Um, 5 more seconds to vote. And the polling. 63% of the Israeli parliament. So this legislation passed the Israeli-Palestinian parliament by more than 55%. Let's go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation? The question really becomes is, do we need to give them a veto? I'm not sure that they are indispensable.
Yeah,
really,
you give me a veto, I'll veto it, because you're talking about taking taxes away from the Israeli government.
I see. Okay, so in that case, you are
but-
indispensable.
But,
Yeah.
but you're indispensable because it's basically going to replace them. So it's
Yeah. Okay, so
But
yeah.
we already said in various previous simulations that the IPC would have its own taxation system. So
Correct, but that's
and
different
that's not something that the Israeli government was given veto power over.
Yeah, they were given a veto power. Absolutely.
Over the IPC having the taxes to sustain itself?
Absolutely. It was given a veto power. The proposal was that a reduction in the Israeli and the Palestinian government's taxes of 6%, 3% going to the IPC and 3% going to the taxpayer. So and the Israeli and the Palestinian government were given a veto power over that. Yes.
No. Okay.
All right, let's go to the Palestinian parliament members. Are you going to veto this legislation?
The Palestinian president.
Palestinian
Yes,
president, I'm
yes,
sorry.
I'm going to veto it because you know, the position of the Palestinian government is to support the self-determination of the Palestinian people to create a Palestinian homeland. And I feel that this solution skips that and takes us ahead. This might be something that we can see in the future, but unless we don't address today's concern, which is the establishment of a Palestinian homeland and the return of its people, and then to build a future, but we support two states for two people, and to live in peace with each other before we can go into this type of joint venture with any state.
All right. Okay, let's go to post-simulation survey. After participating in the simulation, do you support a common federal government? Let's publish the vote, and the vote is remaining exactly the same as it was before. 22 out of 23 voted yes, 1 voted no. Would the person who voted no, could you please identify yourself? Is that you, Charles?
No,
Oh,
no, it wasn't me.
so could you please identify yourself?
Oh, it's Carla Roth. Is that you? Okay. Were you the person who voted no in the beginning? Can you say yes? No.
Take your mute. You're mute. You are
You're
muted.
muted. You're muted, Carla.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Yeah, the whole time I already wanted to talk. First of all, I'm very happy to be here, one of 4th or 5th women. And I love the Swiss because the women, they could vote only 1970. And it's very good. I am forward man. And men should really, because they are powerful and they are very good soldiers. And okay, we women can kill also, but no, I was crying when we had this federal system. I had the feeling I'm together with Joseph and with Herzl. If we really dream, it can be a solution. And I was playing the whole game with you, Joseph. And I'm very happy. I'm also Israeli. I have the Israeli. אני גם כן, יש לי אזרחות ישראלית. אני גדלתי בפנימיית הדסים. I'm from Israel also. I was living there. I was going away from Israel because I didn't want it to go to the military then, because I had an Israeli friend who was living in Amsterdam. And he was very much against the whole system by fighting. I'm living here now in Germany. The father of my son, he is Muslim. His name is Nasser. And I'm very much with my heart. I'm very, very much for your idea. But when you were talking about the cantons and also about who will have the money when you make the Gaza, when you will build the Gaza, it must be topless. The Gaza must be rebuilt. And okay, we can do it from outside, from America, from Germany. I'm so happy I'm living here in Germany and not in Israel. Because the whole war, my son has not to go to the military. And he's not grown up in Israel. So I think the idea is okay. We can always play the idea.
But you voted against it.
But I voted against it because I think it's not realistic. It's not realistic.
I see. So that's all. the reason you voted is because you are in favor of it, but you think it's not realistic, and therefore you voted against it.
Yeah, okay. No, another reason. It's not realistic and it's dangerous.
What's dangerous about it?
When you have these 5 million and you want to rebuild Gaza, and you said also in the constitution that the people of Gaza, they didn't vote for or Israelis didn't vote for the government. But when in Gaza there was the Fatah and the Hamas was overcoming, that's why my question was, Swiss is okay, but Lebanon, for example, Lebanon has also this federation, I think, in Lebanon. It can be that then comes more than you are very, very well. It's very well. Your idea is fantastic, but there comes even a stronger idea, and they will take the money, and then they will, like they did it in Gaza, the Hamas. And how you want now the Hamas to be autonomic now? If we now finish the war, if we make a ceasefire, this is very dangerous.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for your comments. Let's go to and we'll go to closing remarks. We believe that a common democratic confederation government can bring peace. It can be created. It is a realistic idea. All it needs is the funding to do the election and to advertise the election and to advertise its benefit and to advertise the failure of the Israeli and the Palestinian governments to give peace to their people. Just want to remind you that 1 week of war between Israel and Gaza cost over $3 billion. We will need far less funding for that in order to create a federal government. And the money that is being spent is by governments that are not legitimate in Israel, Palestine. We are in favor of creating a federal government that would be legitimate for the people of Israel and Palestine. This is what it costs. This is what you need $100 million for. You can also create a federal government with that amount of money. So let me stop sharing, and I'm going to turn it over to Nasir to conduct the question and answers for David and for comments. Nasir?
Yes, thank you, Joseph. So right now we're going to have questions and comments. In order for us to let's try to make the questions and comments summaries. Let's not try to make them into long monologues. We want to give an opportunity for David to, he's our guest. We want to hear what he has to say and his reflections on what he saw today. So let's start with Saeed.
Yes, as a Palestinian, I like to tell Mrs. Carla that it is not possible, but it is possible, because what makes me sit in this room today and shifted my belief system and start seeing things differently since I met my brother Joseph Abbasar will make everything else possible. If you make me comes to this and start promoting for this IPC idea, that means I could influence at least 100,000 Palestinians as a person. I know that myself. So what sometimes I see, a lot of people does not really understand where we come from. What make this idea different and unique. As a Palestinian, I don't care where I live in my country. All I care about, I want to have equal rights. I want to be free from the river to the sea. Being free from the river to the sea, that does not mean I want to get rid of Joseph. In the day of the flag day in Jerusalem, Joseph was visiting my town in West Bank and felt safe and welcome in West Bank more than be welcome in Haifa and Yafa. So what I'm saying is, what brings us together today. I am not looking at you as an enemy, as a Jew. I'm looking at you as a victim. I believe we Palestinian and Jewish are the victim of these crazy right-wing people who's controlling the government, of our government, and mainly Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Smotrich. So how can we do this? We have to put our vote together. And for Professor David, I just want to tell you something. I've been living here in America since 1992. My family emigrated to America in 1912. My cousin Omar Aziz, a senator in Brazil, in the federal government of Brazil today, Omar Aziz, and previous governor of the state of Amazonas, was elected by the Brazilian government, and he's not even Brazilian. His mom is Italian. His dad is my uncle. They immigrated to Brazil. He's not even Brazilian, and he ruled millions of people in Brazil. What I'm trying to say, I stopped seeing that I am your enemy. I start seeing you as a victim. We need to stop this madness, and stopping the madness start from United States of America, because look at what Biden administration did in the past year or so, and Trump can make a phone call to Netanyahu and can shut it down right now. So we need to start in America. We need to start putting the power together, because if we can be successful in this country, we could be successful in Palestine, Israel. So I see a vision, I see a possibility, I see a hope, and we need to start working more and more. That's why I like to welcome my guest today, Hamza Al-Umran. He's from Jordan. He's gonna be helping us in promoting this idea. Welcome, Hamza. And keep going where we're going, and put in every energy and have hope that we can make difference in this life. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to comment, Professor David?
Yeah, let me say a few things. One is the Lebanese system has been brought up, and this is not the Lebanese system, which, as I understand it, is a power sharing system between the various religious groups in Lebanon. And the problem with that is, over time, you got population changes, you got all sorts of things. And it's also sort of dividing people up into these, in some sense, I don't know, rigid categories. The canton system would be based on geography, right? You would divide these up. The geography, the demographics of a canton can change over time. And you would have a weak federal government with a kind of a presidency that's really a byproduct of the cantons. So I don't think this is a power. It is not a power sharing agreement like Lebanon. I agree with Saeed that we really need to start focusing on what individuals want and their similarities. And if we look at Palestinians, I mean, there aren't as many as there used to be, but there are Christians, there are Druze, there are secularists, there are fundamentalists, and we find similar divisions among Israelis. So if we can get a system where these, you might get Israeli secularists aligning with Palestinian secularists, and you might get co-religionists, and so forth. So I think that is an issue as well. One last thing real quick. There is a history to the canton idea. It was presented at the UN in 1946 and 47 by a man named Judah Magnus, who was the president of Hebrew University. Magnus pushed the canton idea, very interesting, and it got the support of several countries, but unfortunately they chose to go with partition, with the partition plan instead of the canton plan. But it was discussed. It got support, I think, of Iran. It got support of Syria, and Yugoslavia and some other places.
I like to add one more thing, Dr. David. Me as Saeed, just because I'm a friend of Joseph, a lot of Palestinians call me Jasus, and they want to kill me because I am snitching against my own people, and I'm working. I was recruited by the Mossad agent Joseph Abbasar to be part of this group. So we do have a problem. We do have a problem in our community, like.
Well, Mossad thinks this group is important. That's a step forward.
Yeah.
That were true.
Thank you. All right. Go ahead, Charles.
Well, I would like to talk about what I see as the positive aspects that also along with the negative aspects of David's proposal. And to me, it gets down to, a question of identity, and the thing that people are willing to go out and fight and kill each other about is their vision of the future in terms of their own identity, being able to secure what they see as their identity into the future. And this is a problem, obviously, not just in Israel and Palestine, but with authoritarian movements in Europe and also in the United States. We have the same kind of thing going on. But this is a way of, it's like, to me, it's kind of like giving the Israeli and the Palestinian governments a veto power. It's like saying, okay, we're not going to prevent you from having your identity. In fact, you can even, like, if you want, you can declare that this particular canton is your identity. So you have the right-wing Israelis and the settlers, can form their own canton, but then they could be limited in the practice of that to their own canton. And the fact that it worked in Switzerland is something that we often refer to in terms of saying that a federal system can work and still have divisions within it that allow people to feel secure about their identity. So I think I see that as kind of a positive possibility, and I think it's worthy of further investigation. Let me put it that way.
Can I add something to what Charles is saying, Professor David, before you respond to that?
Sure.
Do you mind? Okay. Switzerland versus Palestine, Israel. Would you say that, and maybe I'm just culturally ignorant and bigoted, I don't know, maybe, the fact that in Europe, is there issues between Catholics and Protestants today or in the last, like, say, 100 years, where in Palestine, Israel, the distinction between Palestinians and Israelis, and even in terms of religious, is still is a strong identifying things. Like, I don't find, like, I've traveled throughout Europe, I don't see religion as an identity that necessarily, like, I'm a Catholic, I'm a Protestant, maybe 300-400 years ago, but today it isn't. But in Palestine, Israel, this is still an issue. Religion is an identity. Israelis, Judaism is their identity, even though they're not religious, they're still, and for Palestinians as well, it's Islam or whatever is their identity. So I think that in the Swiss model, it would make sense because people see themselves more as, I am European, I am Swiss, before I am a Catholic or a Protestant or a Calvinist, etc.
That's a very good question.
Well, you got the example of the Northern Ireland and Ireland. They were killing each other fairly recently and still do now and again.
Or I suppose in Bosnia as well, one could point to that. But
David,
I agree, and I think,
can you move the screen because we see 90% of your book and
where am I? I'm trying to see myself here.
You're cut off. You're cut off. Just almost.
I can't even
below
see
the head.
myself on
That's
this.
better. That's
Yeah,
better.
that's better.
All right. I'm looking at using my daughter's thing here. Is it all right now?
yeah, it's much better.
Yeah.
Can I say something about Europe? Sorry, it's very ill-mannered of me. Can I just jump in? Because you were speaking about Europe as though there was tolerance between different religions. So let me tell you that Islamophobia is rife in Europe, and it's very serious. And if you're at the receiving end, if you're Muslim, it's not pleasant. Why don't Europeans want immigrants? Because they come from Muslim countries and they happen to be Muslim. It's disgraceful because the birth rate is so low. Europe needs manpower. Europe needs people. But oh, no, not Muslims. It's a very, very serious question, problem. And it has helped vote into power these ultra-right governments in one country after another. So please don't speak about religious tolerance between the different Christian sects. Yes, because people by and large don't practice. They've become secular. Some people do practice,
Yeah.
but that's not an issue. The big issue and the suffering concerns Muslims in Europe. And I'm ashamed of this because I live in Europe. I'm very, very ashamed of my fellow Europeans. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, but I meant it in terms of establishing the not the current problems you have, but in the terms of establishing of a canton model, not in the terms of the situation we have today.
Sorry, yeah. Oh, I understand, Nasser. I understand what you mean. Yes, but don't let anyone say that there's religious tolerance in Europe. Well, ask the Muslims first. Ask them, not me. And they suffer. Believe you me.
Okay.
They tend to be dark as well.
Okay.
That's not good. If you
did you want?
Can we go back to the
Sure.
question?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sure do. Please.
Hello.
Yeah,
Yeah,
David.
go ahead, Professor David.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I'm up now, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think religion is less important now, religious divisions now, certainly in Switzerland, than they were 100 years ago, 200 years ago. But in a certain sense, that is an argument for how well the system has worked. And maybe you would see the same thing happening in a situation where people can feel more secure to find doubt, more secure to communicate with people of different religions and ethnic backgrounds, less isolated. I think it would make people less isolated because it would provide a kind of a platform of greater security. And if it is true that religion is so intense in Israel, Palestine, then that's just going to be a problem for any system. So what system can manage that better? I would say something like this could manage it a lot better than a top-down federal system where people kind of are just fighting for control of that federal system. As you find in Lebanon, for example.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead, Shlomo. We're going to go Shlomo, then me, then George, and then Samir, and then Saeed again.
Okay, quickly. First, I agree with Saeed, everything he said. Number two, how about two cantons? This is for David. One canton in the West Bank, actually three, West Bank, Gaza, and then Israel proper, 367. So we have three cantons. We can add more cantons later, say, and maybe the Golan. But first, those three. So how about that as the two? In a way, that's the two-state solution. While you agree to everything, in between, the freedom of movement, etc. One issue, of course, it's the right to return, and I agree with Samir, with Nasir, that yeah, it's an issue, and at the end we will have to enable it, which means that it will be a majority of Palestinians, which means that at the end, from the river to the sea, it will be a Palestinian state. But I will not go that far. Yeah, so that's one thought. I am not totally crystallized. I have another thought for David. How about implementing the IPC idea to the United States of America? Because we already have double government. We have the government full of puppets, and then we have the deep state. Will be another government that will really represent the people, because the current governments don't represent the people. So, and that will be, at the least, it will be like a way to press, to show those representatives of the official government what the people really want. Because just a thought for the future, it's not related to here, so you don't have to answer. Yeah, those are my thoughts for now.
Yeah, that would be a great idea. Another area that is, again, we're not really talking about, but East Jerusalem, has a very interesting situation where you have a majority of the population who were born there, born in Israeli territory, do not have the franchise. So, maybe, I don't know about cantons, but there are a lot of perhaps possibilities of kind of micro experiments that could be tried, transitional experiments. That's an idea. We'll see how it works. Let's try it out here. Let's try it out there. Demonstration
Yes.
projects. Yeah.
I happen to be from East Jerusalem neighborhood, and I live my home. I'm in the U.S., but my home in East Jerusalem area is actually 2 blocks away from an Israeli neighborhood of Pisgat Zayev. So it's very familiar with that. But I want to ask your questions about some of the things that you mentioned earlier. You said you had never visited the country, and as far as your proposal, when you said about the settlers, that it'd be impossible to get them to move. I don't know if you're familiar, but 80% of the settlers live in about 4 to 5% of the West Bank, and they live very close to the Green Line. And some proposals have presented, like I, for example, see a 2-state solution as the only practical solution, but not saying that confederation doesn't work. And I'm going to tell you why. Because it's a solution that can be implemented immediately. And we know that a 1-state solution is something that's going to probably take so many years and possibly decades. And the problem with people who live on the ground now is I don't think we have decades. Palestinian people don't have 10 years for Israelis and the West to become enlightened and say, hey, let's have a canton or a 1-state solution that's going to give freedom and equal rights to everybody. Because by the time they become enlightened, guess what? The West Bank will be turned into Gaza by that time that this happens. It's going to be basically nobody there. And then guess what? There's no more, we're discussing how to share a pizza. There's no more slices left. It's been eaten. So knowing that 80% of the settlers living on 4% of the West Bank, and that we can do things like territory swaps, giving each country a right to have its own sovereignty, to establish itself, to develop itself, to bring people, to Palestinians, to return back to a future state of Palestine. And then these solutions, such as confederation, such as canton economic unions, etc., can be something when 2 states are equal, and we can move and develop these relationships. Did the European Union happen overnight? It didn't. The European Union took approximately 50 years to develop into what it is now.
Yeah, I've heard though. I mean, I've seen the maps. I've seen the maps of the West Bank, which show that there are settlements scattered throughout, and
yeah, but
not geographically contiguous. Now, maybe you could arrange through land swaps. Maybe you would have to do some removals for that to work, I assume.
Yeah, but settlers would I mean, in an ideal situation, settlers, it's something like 10 to 50,000 maybe that live in areas that would be, under, say, a Palestinian state. They would either be given the choice, either go live in a settlement that's going to fall under Israeli jurisdiction annexation, or remain living in Palestinians, just like there's Palestinians who live inside Israel. We can have a few numbers of Jews who live inside the West Bank and, of course, have security. This is the step, because we cannot have 10 to 50,000 people stop the future of peace for 15 million people. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, the mechanics of that, I would think, have become more difficult in recent years with the growth of the settlements. And presumably, I'm not an expert on this, but aren't the settlements becoming gradually over time more dispersed? You have to have a situation where we'll connect directly, I would say, to Israel proper. So maybe you can do that through land swaps, but I just don't see much discussion of doing that kind of thing now. But I do see a lot of emphasis on more settlements. So that's going to make that even more difficult, I would assume.
So why not leave the settlements there and let them decide whether they want to stay under the Palestinian rule or they want to move, and then with some incentives to Israel proper. That's another way.
I think that you need to have pressure exerted somehow. And one idea that I'm wondering about is, why isn't there a campaign for 1 person, 1 vote in East Jerusalem? Why isn't there a movement among Palestinians in East Jerusalem to say, we want to be treated just like our Arab cousins in West Jerusalem? We want to have birthright voting rights. We were born in Israel, so why don't we have birthright voting rights? Is there any such movement? But if you got a movement like that occurring, it would put some pressure on the status quo, as you had in the American South. You had pressure exerted from below.
There was there is a movement. It's called All of Its Residents. And it was a movement, and we actually had the leader here as a guest in the municipal elections of Jerusalem. And the reason why such a thing doesn't catch traction among Palestinians is that Palestinians of East Jerusalem feel that if they were to accept it, they are accepting Israeli illegal occupation of East Jerusalem. Our position is that East Jerusalem is not a part of Israel. We don't want it to be annexed because we cannot protect our homes, our properties, our public lands that are being taken. There's a process of Judaization that's going on in Jerusalem where Palestinians' homes are being demolished at rates much higher than anything Jewish. Permits for Palestinians is impossible. So accepting Israeli sovereignty over East Jerusalem is a very serious problem for us.
What if there was just an official Israeli edict, pressure made somehow to say you have the same birthright? Because the Arabs have birthright voting rights. If you live in Tel Aviv, you're Arab, you have birthright voting rights. I don't know. It just seems like I'm glad that there's some talk of it, but it seems like a natural argument to make. Just treat us the same as Arab Israelis.
Yeah.
They're born there. They get the vote automatically. They don't have to apply for it. They don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops. They have it by birth.
Okay.
Good luck. Good luck.
Yeah, good luck. Yeah.
You're right.
Let's move to I want to move to the next questions. I'm sorry to keep people waiting. George?
Yes, I'd like to ask, I want to thank David for bringing this idea because I think it may have possibilities. And I want to ask him for a clarification. I'm a Canadian. We have a federal state here. There's a constitution where the federal government has certain powers, and each of the provinces, which I guess would be analog of cantons, also have defined powers. So I'd like to know, is the Swiss canton system similar to this? There's a federal government with certain powers, and the cantons each have their own powers. Is that the way it works?
I would think that the cantons probably have greater local powers, but there is a federal government. Like I said, it's a very weak one. You kind of have a rotating presidency, different person is president every year and nobody even knows who they are, which I really find refreshing. But I think one big difference is scale. And this is why this is a good system for Israel-Palestine. Because if you have such a small scale for the cantons, that means if you don't like the way it's going, it's like moving from Tuscaloosa to Northport, Alabama, right? The costs of exit are very low. And with Canada, certainly you have the cost of exit can be very high in terms of moving one from one place to the other, or the United States, because the states are so big. But those are federal systems, and Switzerland is called a confederation, but I would say it's sort of a confederation, combination confederation federal system. It's got kind of elements of both, I think you could say. And we can get too hung up, I guess, on this terminology.
No, but what I like, okay. Just one more thing. I think, yeah.
Okay, can we?
I think David's idea and all ideas deserve point-by-point discussion. Like we sort of disposed of this idea in 10 minutes. I think it's an idea with possibilities. It was just introduced today. We hardly know what it's about after a 20-30 minute discussion. In all parliaments, when there's a major idea brought up, in committee, there's point-by-point discussion. This idea of David's is worth point-by-point discussion, so at least we become familiar with it. And if we reject it, we reject it with full knowledge, not based on a 20-minute discussion. And we would all learn a lot in such a discussion. Disposing of major ideas like this in 20 minutes, I don't think is serious. We should be a far more informed group here. And I think this idea of David's deserves further examination. For example, I just want to give one quick example from Canada. Quebec, I live in Montreal, Quebec. Quebec is very different from the rest of Canada, but the Canadian Confederation has the flexibility to give Quebec, which is Francophone, the freedom to to control language and culture. And it
Yeah.
works very well, just as in Israel, there are areas which would, I'm sure, would like to control their little part of it. In culture, there's a very strong federal government for money, for defense, military. That's federal. That's understood, and everybody accepts it. But culture and such identity issues are controlled by the equivalent here in Canada, provinces, which are the equivalent of cantons. So, this sort of government has the possibility of great flexibility for groups who are attached to their identities to hang on to those identities. Yet movement and trade and defense are all possible because it's a federal system as well. So it's a good compromise between centralization and local power. So it is worth further discussion.
Thank you, George. The other thing, George, I mean, it's all a question of time. We are a simulation, so sometimes a lot of things have to be to the imagination because, we all have limited time and we're just trying to display like how it could work. But of course, in a real world situation, things, of course, would have to be studied more and approached differently. But, we have just limited time. But I want to go to Samir. Go ahead, Samir.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Nasser. Thank you, David. Okay. What I think, David idea, maybe it's ideal, wonderful, but it does not apply to Israel-Palestine for one simple reason, that Israel is occupying Palestine, occupying the whole land, and it is one reality, it's one apartheid state. So the answer to that to end the occupation for any solution, whether I'm in the confederation or one state or two state or your canton model, any of those, you cannot apply it before ending the occupation. You end the occupation, number one, and then you let the Palestinians, you have elections in all historic Palestine, Palestinian and Israelis, let them vote and elect what they like, whether they want one state or two state or confederation or whatever. I mean, the idea of here is a model and apply it is not going to work because the reality is different. Reality that there is an occupation, and that occupation has been going on for 57 years. There is no solution before ending the occupation, period. Period.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samir. David, Professor David, would you like to respond?
Yeah, but how do you do that, right? Israelis don't seem to want to do that.
BDS.
Hmm?
BDS.
That's been around a while. I don't see that it's moving the needle myself.
Well, it's been moving, and just like what happened in South Africa, it should happen here.
What happened in South Africa, I think, is a good parallel. They had a one person, one vote movement. This is what Mandela's strategy was, much like Martin Luther King. That movement does not exist among Palestinians to the same.
No, it does exist. No,
I haven't seen. We wanted one person, one vote for the Knesset. I think in East Jerusalem that would be a very powerful movement, potentially. But that's what the Martin Luther King did in South Africa. They were demanding one person, one vote within the Republic of South Africa. They weren't creating a separate state.
Are you familiar with the last election and the candidate by the name of Walid Abutaya, who was actually a guest here, and the movement of called all its residents? It was done, and I haven't actually. He reached out to me for help, and you don't understand the opposition that we had, because again, you're even the Mufti of Jerusalem, who by the way is he's a puppet of the Palestinian Authority, by the way, that's my opinion. But the point is that he actually, like, it's a touchy thing because You have to understand, participating with Israeli control of Jerusalem is seen as suicide for many Palestinians because it acknowledges Israeli occupation and annexation. When a government comes and annexes your territories and you participate in its political system, you are surrendering your rights to freedom and to the liberation of that land. I mean, if you can't understand that concept, it's very hard for to say how are these Palestinians not participating with the Israeli government.
I get, an often argument I get from, when I'm in discussions with Israelis is they point out, well, we let our Arabs vote. They're 20% of our voters. It all works great. Everybody. Now, I don't necessarily agree that it all works great, but they brag about it. They say how great it is. Well, why not? I think it might be you have a model. It's not like it hasn't happened before. Why not extend that model?
You're touching on a surface. The participation of the 20% of the population that is Arab in Israel is extremely low. I mean, if you look at poverty levels in the Arab communities in the 48 territories, it's like at 60, 70%. If you look at allocation for lands and stuff, it's ridiculous where you have, for example, not one new Arab city has been built in the 48 territories except like recognizing certain communities and things like that. So that's actually the reason I think that the treatment of the 48 Arabs is actually a good reason to show why a one-state solution can't work, because Israel has been very unjust to these part of the citizens of its country who are 20%.
It's 20% isn't enough though. And I think but it's an entering wedge, and it hasn't been viewed as an entering wedge. You say, okay, treat us like our cousins. If we live in East Jerusalem, we want to be treated like our cousins right across the line in West Jerusalem. We want to vote for the Knesset too. You say it works so great, Israel, well, let us have the vote. Now, all right, they're going to reject it, but my experience reading about the history of the American South is that white Southerners were very comfortable defending segregation. They were very worried about integrated schools. They were very worried about that. But when you pressed them on voting rights, they weren't quite as able to fight back on that issue because it's so obvious that you're denying people the vote. So I would just say we're not living in a perfect world. We have bad strategies to choose from.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we really look at it, at the whole situation, we find that the Israeli governments, all governments since inceptions, and especially since 1967, very damn stupid. Because, I mean, if they really want to have peace and the whole thing will be settled, they have their own model. Yeah. They don't need to look for any other model. They already started the model in the early 60s, before 1967, by ending the military rule of Palestine and one man, one vote, and they treated the Palestinian equal citizens, and that's it. They ended that before 1967. So that's their model.
Okay.
And then when it came 1967, they didn't apply it. I mean, what they needed to do is just copy what they did in the early 60s, ending the occupation, and that's it, and make the Palestinians equal, and one state, one democratic state, and it's over. And it's been going on for the last 57 years. They didn't need any other model. I mean, they didn't learn from their own model. They didn't learn from history. They didn't learn anything. So damn stupid, I mean. All of them. Samir,
governments. Samir, let's do this. Samir, let's do this because we're gonna run out of time. Professor David,
I mean,
it's
looking 11, at the model. I mean, talking models.
We're into an hour and a half. Are you good on time? Because we have three more questions before we close up. Are we good on time?
Sure.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're not. Can we make the questions and comments a little bit more brief because we're running short of time and we want to make sure. So we're gonna do Saeed, Joseph, and then Shlomo again. Go ahead, Saeed.
I like to use an example about my uncle, my mom brother. His name is Ali. My uncle, my mom's side inherited the land from my grandmother. My uncle Ali, he conquered the land. He's like Ben Gafir and Smotrich to me. I call him the settler. What he do, he know this land will be shared by all his brothers and sisters, and he go and he built a house. And by the end of the day, when we come and say, okay, we need our mom's land, he say, I will give you whatever belongs to you in cash. And my mom refused to get cash because she need cash. She said, I want my mom's land. That's what's happening right now to us as a Palestinian. We have settlers who show up in the towns. Like today in Jericho, 3 settlers controlled a land bigger than Gaza Strip. 3 settlers, and nobody can stop them. You know, I see how we resolve the problem. We have a problem, not just this. We have a problem from United States government. When Trump elected his cabinet, you know, he have to name the defense minister, the secretary of state. And you know what, with this cabinet, the first thing to name was Mike Huckabee. Mike Huckabee will sit in the right of Smotrich. Mike Huckabee does not recognize me. Mike Huckabee does not call West Bank is Palestine. He call it Judea and Samaria. So our problem, ladies and gentlemen, is not the settlers, it's not the people, it's not the election. Because when we find a true leader like Rabin, who asked to start peace, he found a lot of Palestinians work with him, and by the end of the day, he got assassinated by Smotrich people. So my point is, when you go to the Congress today, and few Palestinian protesters ask for the support of the Congress, they don't even recognize you. So the problem starts from here, and if we have to work anywhere, the work have to start in the United States of America. Thank you.
All I can say is thumbs up.
Okay. Thank you, Said. So Joseph?
Yeah, thank you. So I think that whenever you make any suggestions for a reasonable resolution or even an unreasonable resolution of Israel-Palestine, you have to consider 2 things. And you have to explain those 2 things. First, how do we get from here to the solution that you are proposing? Whether you're proposing a 1-state, 2-state, confederation, federation, canton. I see a lot of merits in the canton. I see a lot of merits in 1 state. My favorite, personally, I think the best solution is 1 state. 1 state under 1 government for everyone, based on secular democracy.
You're right. That's the best.
That's my personal best solution. But you have to explain, how do we get from where we are today to the best solution? And then you have to honestly deal with the obstacles that are in the way. The reason I advocate for a federal government is because I think that it is the most, first of all, it allows for all other solutions. It doesn't really precludes other solution. It basically advocates for the people of Israel, Palestine, making the substantive discussions and having the substantive discussion and deciding in a democratic way what is the best solution. But I think also that I advocate for a federal government, even though personally, I do not think it's the best solution. I think that it's the most realistic solution, because right now we live in the age of the internet. We live in a global age, and we can create an election for the people of Israel and Palestine to vote for parliament members. And the obstacles are, there are obstacles, financial obstacles, huge financial obstacles. I think that's the obstacle is about $100 million. There is the obstacle of the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and huge part of the Israeli and the Palestinian population. I think those obstacles could be overcome fairly easily if we are able to obtain the funding. And that solution of a federal government will give the options of all other solutions, to all other solutions.
Okay. Would you like to comment, Professor David?
No, I mean, I agree. I agree.
It's interesting because, you know, I consider Joseph a very good friend, dear friend, and we agree on a lot of stuff. But like, here's an example where we have two different. Where he says he sees a one-state solution as a much more. I think we all support the end, which is equality for all. But I think it's just the approach. How do we get there? And I think that's the same thing with your proposal. I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's a fine proposal. I just think that the issue is how do we get there, and that's probably where we differ. And I think that's the same thing with
we don't differ. We don't differ. If the federal government agree on a two-state, I am all for it.
Exactly. Yes.
You are not against the federal government. I am not against the federal government. I propose a federal government. Whatever they decide in an honest and fair way.
No, but I meant your personal, not the IPC, but because I believe you're a one state.
Oh, okay. My personal belief is that one state, because to me, making a distinction based on religion or based on nationality it doesn't make sense. Simply doesn't make sense.
Okay. So
and also it already worked. I mean, it is the idea of one state. It's already worked. I mean, the Israel today, that is one state solution. What they need is just to expand it to include the West Bank and Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem and make it one, the same thing. That's all.
But you are ignoring, Samir, you're ignoring the obstacle. And the obstacle is the Israeli people, Israeli government they want a Jewish state. And for them, a one state nullify the idea of a Jewish state. And they will not agree to it, in my opinion. So in theory, yes, absolutely. But I don't see it as a practical way because it is so entrenched. Being Israeli myself, the idea of a Jewish state is so entrenched that to say, well, you just nullify your state and include all the Palestinians in Israel, Palestine.
It's not nullify. No. It's not nullifying.
It is.
No. It is not nullifying. It is expanding it. Expanding democracy. That's all.
Yeah, expanding democracies, but not a Jewish democracy.
Well, I mean, and when you expand, I mean, actually, when you expand and you accept them as equal citizens, that's democracy. That's it. Then
no question about it. It's an improvement on democracy, but they don't want that.
It is the actual. I mean, this is the easiest improvement. This is the easiest way to get there.
Easiest for you, easiest for me, easiest for us.
Yeah, but that's exactly.
So I mean, it's easy for Israelis actually. Easy for Israelis to accept.
I think Nasir is right. The best avenue to take now is two-state solution. And find a solution.
So Shlomo, you had your hand up. I don't know if you had a question.
Yes, I have my hand up. I didn't. Yeah. So first of all, I agree with you. Of course, ideally, we have one state. I don't like the whole idea of nationalism in general. So one state with equal rights, But Israelis are not only won't agree because of the Jewish state, and Joseph is right. The Jewish state idea is so deep in the mind of most Israelis and Jews all over. But and one state is a huge fear of the Israeli. Okay, suppose many people are like me, don't care anymore, Jewish state or no, they want equality, period. And Gideon Levy and such. But then there is a huge fear among the Israelis that the moment that will happen, many things will happen. There will be almost immediately, majority of Palestinians. That means that becomes Palestine. that means that also that the revenge will come.
No, that is democracy. That's real democracy.
I know, but there is there is a fear of revenge. There is a fear of, okay, you have the right of return, but people come and go, okay, this was my home or my parents' home way back. You just take off. This is mine now. The Israelis are in huge fear. In fact, the only thing that keeps the Israelis together or the Jews in Israel together is fear. And the Israeli governments loved it because that's how they keep the people under control. So it's very hard.
They fear democracy. Actually, they fear democracy. That's what it is.
Yeah, they do.
In a way, yes, but this is
They
what I'm
fear
saying.
real democracy. Yes, yes. They don't want real democracy because in real democracy, probably yes. What I see it, if there is a real democracy, if they now one state, you have 7 million Palestinian and 7 million Israeli Jews. You elect the parliament, Knesset, parliament, a new parliament. It will be half-half. And in a way, then you will end up maybe you elect prime minister Palestinian this time and Israeli president.
Okay,
and then the next term
you need to give Carola.
I'm gonna go.
And
I'm gonna give Carola.
It is possible.
Samir. We're gonna move because literally we're
okay. All right.
Yeah, we're really running out of time. Go ahead, Carola.
One question. You said revanche. I want to know the 7th of October. This is every day in my mind. The 7th of October. Do you think it's a thing of the Palestinian revanche?
Who are you asking the question to?
Wait, this very nice man. Okay, not that. Wait. I'm asking. Wait. Just a minute. Samir, please tell me. The 7th of October. Why did that happen?
Why did it happen? I tell you that the Gaza Strip, since 2007, they were under siege, and it was like an open prison for all Palestinians living in Gaza.
And that's why that day.
Of course. I mean, if you live in a prison yourself, if you are in Warsaw ghetto, and that's what it is. Gaza ghetto is like the Warsaw ghetto. And there was an uprising. No. I just want to bring you an example. There was the Warsaw uprising. And this is October 7th. It is an uprising. This is the Palestinian uprising.
Full respect. Okay, your answer. But I want to know, Nasser, please tell me why that happens the 7th of October.
I agree. I think that October 7th was it occurred because we are unresolved in this conflict, and we're gonna have more October 7th, and we're gonna have more Israelis bombing of Palestinian cities and massacres. As long as we continue this conflict and there's no resolution, things like October 7th on both sides are going to occur. It's an unfortunate thing that we need to solve. Anyways, I want to continue because I'm sorry. I think we're taking focus away from the discussion with David. Said, if it's related to Said just not there. But I wanted to also say, Professor David, you mentioned something about the communities, the settler communities that are close to the Green Line and Palestinian communities, how there's trade in between them. If you came to Palestine in the 1990s, and like we used to go to Jenin, from Jerusalem to Jenin, it was a popular destination Thursday nights. And Jenin is a very radical part of the West Bank where you're having a lot of militarism and militants that are, pretty much it can be a dangerous place. But in Thursday nights, which is our Friday nights, weekend start, you would go to Jenin and you would find Israeli license plates all over the place because people would come to go shopping there because products were cheaper. It was sort of like the in the United States, if you go to Tijuana, for example, you can go find stuff for, to have some fun, dinner, cheap food, drinks, and go shopping. And even, for example, if you look at settlements like Gush Etzion, which is near Bethlehem, there's There's a famous guy, he fixes tires and stuff, where Israeli settlers actually take their cars there because it's cheaper to get, you know, tire replacements, mechanical repairs. So and even in Gaza, after Oslo, Gaza had been a resort for people to go to the hotels and stuff. So these type of things were happening before. So it's not necessarily that, you know, the economies and the infrastructure of the countries are actually pretty well in time, you know, and the Palestinians do work inside Israel. So this is already occurring without any type of canton solution. It's just that the political solution is what the problem is.
All right.
Yeah.
I would like to thank Professor David Beito. You were very generous with your time, and I thank you for sitting with us and discussing your idea for cantons and our idea for a confederation federal government. I don't see them as conflicting each other. They're probably they could work together very easily. And I want to thank you so much for your participation and generosity.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This has really been enjoyable.
Thank you for your time. I sent you 2
And your last
emails.
name means in Arabic his house. You know that? Beito.
Yeah.
All right. It's Norwegian, but you never know.
That's right. Original Arabic. Yeah.
Yeah. Professor, I sent you 2 emails regarding what we had discussed earlier. The links to the site that I was telling you about.
David T. Beito at Gmail.
Yeah.
And I'll send you all links to the article.
Awesome.
And there's some interesting stuff I found on UN debates in 1947. There are links to them.
Yeah.
This was being discussed by the UN. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.